Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful evening of See and Learn 2019. Woo! First off, we do want to thank all of you guys for coming out and joining us tonight at beautiful Queens Gardens Resorts, and thank you, Queens Gardens, for hosting us. Yeah! Those of you tuning in with us in the virtual world, thank you for joining us on Facebook. We encourage you guys to comment where you're watching from. And if you have any questions at the end of the show, please let us know, and we'll try to get it answered by our expert. All right. And with that being said, we do want to give a big thank you to Carib Trans for making it possible for us to share it with people all around the world. You guys rock. All right. And we do want to give a thank you to Scout's Place for hosting our expert and making him feel like at home here on Saba. And thank you to New Star Energy for supporting all of our experts who have come from Statia. A big thank you to Prince Bernhard Culture Funds and the government of Saba for their generous donations and kind support. One more big thank you to all of our sponsors who, without them, this wouldn't be possible. So thank each and every one of you for your support. All right, some of you guys have been buying raffle tickets with Miss Emily over here. And yeah, we got some tickets over there. Woo! All right, so what you guys can win. We got lots of great raffle prizes this year. Starting from the upper corner, we have 2 round-trip tickets on the Dawn 2 ferry going back and forth from St. Martin to Saba Island. We also have a wine gift basket from Shea Booba. We have a handcrafted Triton Forge knife from John. Ooh, ah. We have a 2-night stay at Travel Inn, which is on St. Martin Island. Yep. And we have 3 prizes from Aquamania Adventures. A sunset sail for 2 around St. Martin Island. We have 2 round-trip tickets on the Edge going back and forth from St. Martin to Saba. And we also have a tango dinner cruise for 2 going around St. Martin Island. Some very neat adventure prizes for you guys. We also have a beautiful piece of glass art from Joe Bean. It'll be a mermaid and a seahorse. Yeah. We also have a 2-for-1 certificate for 8 days, 7 nights aboard the Caribbean Explorer 2 for all of our divers out there. It goes from St. Martin to Saba and St. Kitts. We also have a 2-night stay at Queens Gardens Resort, the beautiful resort you guys are hanging out at right now. You guys can be staying here for 2 nights for free. Really cool, guys. And just so you know, you do not have to be present in order to win. We will be drawing the raffle prizes on October 27th, which is our closing evening. So just make sure you have a number or an email. We can get a hold of you guys, and you guys will be able to win any of these glorious prizes. All right, and coming up tonight, front and center, we have Kimani, Kitson-Walters. So, yeah, whoop, whoop. Yeah. A little bit of background for you guys on Mr. Kimani. He is the data monitoring officer at the Caribbean Netherlands Science Institute in Statia. He received his Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology and Biotechnology from the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus in Kingston, Jamaica. He recently submitted a dissertation for his PhD in Marine Sciences. Kimani is a certified Atlantic Gulf Rapid Reef Assessment scientific diver and has done over 600 dives in the name of scientific research over the last 4 years. Yeah, that's amazing. Tonight, he will be presenting on fish stock sustainability in the Dutch Caribbean. Please give a warm welcome to Kimani.
All right. Good evening again, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this thing on? Yeah. Okay. So as Tiffany said, my name is Kimani Kitson-Walters, and tonight I'm going to try and give you basically a new method. Well, not very new, but a method that has been developed by Dr. Jeremy Prince in the Indo-Pacific. He's an Australian ecologist. And not that I've met him, but we've exchanged a few emails a couple of times. And this method seems very simple to use. It's actually in the Indo-Pacific being used as for community science. So using this method, using the fishers and using them to collect the data to assess their various fish stocks, right? And I thought, hey, we have fishermen too, so why not use it, right? So there we go. Wrong way. Is it left or right? There we go. Okay. So my presentation tonight is entitled Assessing Fish Stock Sustainability in the Dutch Caribbean. Is your fish ripe for the picking? Right? So just a brief outline of what we're going to do tonight. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the overfishing problem throughout globally, and it definitely applies to the Caribbean. How we monitor fish stocks on Saba and Statia. Ayumi, I'm kidding. And going into the method that we use, the new method that I'd like to adapt for Statia, which I should be adapting in January when I get a student to help me out. And what you can do as everyday people to help to, promote sustainable fishing. Right? So unfortunately, over 70% of Caribbean reefs are impacted by overfishing. Right? And that is because over thousands of fishermen who are considered small-scale fisheries use these resources to feed their family, to send their kids to school. And most reefs, most islands in the Caribbean, the reefs are between 1 kilometer, if not less, and 5 kilometers from around these islands. And all these fishermen need these resources for their living, right? But unfortunately, humans being humans, they get greedy, right? Especially if you're an independent entrepreneur, if you can see how much money you can make from this simple resource, you're going to go as hard as you can. And unfortunately, over the last, say, half a century, if not more, fishermen have been going at it, right? There are most of these, the countries that have significantly impacted these resources are like the larger islands like Jamaica, Cuba, the Dominican Republic. And those islands, I don't know if you can see it, these very tiny blue dots up here in the corner. That is Saba and Statia, right? The colors indicate, red indicates that it's highly impacted by overfishing the reefs, and blue indicates very low. But what is one of the main reasons why most of these big islands are impacted by overfishing is because there are a lot of people that like to eat fish, right? As simple as that, right? And most of these countries, unfortunately, are usually underdeveloped, and they have a large a workforce of people who can't find jobs, and the easiest thing to do is to go fishing. Build a fish trap or get some hook and line and to go catch fish, right? But unfortunately, over the last couple of decades, we've had reefs that look like this, and then because of human greed, they become deserts, right? Luckily for Saba and Statia, I don't know how to say this, but we're under the Dutch, I guess. So we get a lot of benefits, right? And the population being so low, you don't have a significant workforce of fishermen who go out. They do fish intensely, yes, and they do catch a lot of fish, but relatively to the rest of the Caribbean, they don't do that much fishing, right? Okay. But what has been happening as it relates to fishing over the last 30 to 40 years is that fish have been getting smaller and smaller. Most people don't notice it. Most fishermen don't notice it because, well, I'll get to that in a bit. And you're catching fewer and fewer big fish. There's less fish in your fish traps. Not on Saba, as I mentioned before. I just want to repeat that, just in case any fisherman hears me and says I'm saying they're catching less fish, right? But this is a regional perspective. Right? You're spending more and more time to catch less fish, right? And the composition in the species, the type of fish that they're catching is also changing, right? But people have been fishing for generations. Why is this happening now? Right? Pointed to the computer, Kimani. Over the last 30 to 40 years, the act of fishing has been getting easier and easier due to the advancement in fishing gear, right? So eons ago, how somebody would catch a fish, native Indians that were on the island, they would find a pig, they would kill the pig, they would eat the nice delicious bacon from off the pig, and then they would use the bone to make a hook, right? And then they would take vines and put together to make fishing line. But back in the day when there was a big grouper that bit onto this hook, without even trying, the grouper could just, please go away, leave me alone, right? But decades later, we have fishing line that is made out of, I think it's nylon. I'm not really a big fisher. So you have hooks that are made out of steel. You have fishing traps that used to be made out of wood that could be damaged quite easily if the number of fish in it got too much. Now they're made out of steel and very hard plastics, mesh. You have more active fishing methods. Before, only fishermen could just stay on the surface and throw the line and hope to catch a fish. Now you have scuba diving with spear guns, people going at night to fish. I mean, don't you want to sleep at night? Why would you go so hard, right? And before, fishermen would have to use topographical references to find their sites. Now you have GPS where you can return to the same sites over and over again and take as much fish as you want, right? Boats with engines. Before, you had to row to go wherever you wanted to go, and you would only be limited by how many beers you had the night before if you were too hungover, right? Now you have engines, boats with engines that can go as far as you want, right? But there's a big but. Fish are still dumb, right? 9 times out of 10, you put a bait on a hook and you throw it over, or you put bait in your trap, there's going to be some dumb fish that's going to go into your fish trap, right? If you take that fish out of the fish trap, well, even with, I know I've heard cases before, there's a nurse shark, remember that nurse shark, who's also a fish, if anybody didn't know, so sharks are fish, yeah. That fish, that shark, after being caught in that fish trap, they throw the shark out, even brought it back to the island, if I'm not mistaken, threw it off on the island, and a couple weeks later, the shark traveled miles, I don't know how, kilometers, back to the fish trap to go back in the same fish trap. To be caught again multiple times, if I'm not mistaken, if I can remember correctly. So fish are dumb, right? And fishermen being greedy, back in the day, the bigger the fish, the more money you will make, right? But because these fishing methods have become so successful at removing big fish, and so fast, and because bigger fish produce more eggs, a 60 centimeter red snapper, 160 centimeter red snapper will produce 9.3 million eggs, right? That is 9.3 million new individuals to go into your, for the future generations of red snapper. You would need 212 40 centimeter red snappers to reproduce this, to produce the same amount of eggs that 160 centimeter red snapper would produce, right? So if fishermen are going after all of these big fish, what happens when all these big fish are gone, right? Over time, you get less and less and less fish. Why? Because if you have all the fishermen going after the 60 centimeter gray snapper in this case that produces 3.4 million eggs, when you successfully removed all those dumb fish, you then go to the 45 centimeter snappers that produce 1.3 million eggs. And then when all those 45 centimeters are gray snappers are finished, you go to the 30 centimeter snappers that are only producing 360 eggs every time they're allowed to reproduce. That is, they can get caught before they reproduce, right? So over time, fish are getting smaller and smaller because the fishermen are getting so successful at removing these bigger fish. And over time, over a very long period of time, the size of the fish decreases. And there, in some communities, there's an argument between younger and older fishermen. The younger fishermen who just come up and just learning to fish, and young people can be what we call in Jamaica a bit bossy, a bit show-offy, right? They will get their 30 centimeter gray snapper, thinking this is the biggest fish they have ever caught. But because they're so young, they have no idea that this 30 centimeter red snapper can be 60 centimeters, right? And they don't notice the change. They don't notice the size change. So there's usually some arguments in fishing communities between older fishermen and younger fishermen, where the older fishermen are trying to tell them, hey, this fish can get this big, and it's like, oh, come on, pops, go and smoke a pipe, chill, you retire, this is my time, right? So they don't notice the change. So what happens over time is that they're fishing down the food web. The Nassau group on top there, in this case, big is best. And when all those Nassau groupers are gone, which is the case in the Caribbean now, they're very rare and hard to find, except on Sable. And next goes the high value species that are very valuable in the market and culture. Then you get those that are easy to catch. And then eventually, you only have the fish that nobody wants, right? Blue tangs and squirrelfish. Has anybody ever had a blue tang or a squirrelfish? Right? On Statia, that's the type of fish that people eat. People like to eat squirrelfish. Yes, you fry it up good, it tastes good, right? Blue tangs, blue tangs are too cute for me, right? Especially the juveniles when they're nice and yellow. It's like, oh my God, it's such a cute fish. Why would you want to eat such a cute fish, right? You have, I don't know if I should even say this. Don't tell any other fishermen on Statia that I said this, please. But they even eat French angelfish. Right? Even cowfish. Right? Do you know how they have to get 10 cowfish, remove all the meat from those 10 cowfish to make one meal to put all the meat in one fish? Because there's no meat in a cowfish. Why would you eat a cowfish? That's because that's all they're catching, unfortunately, in some cases. But luckily for Statia, and in some respects Statia, fishing pressure is a lot less when compared to the rest of the Caribbean, right? And with the composition of species, you can actually tell if an ecosystem is healthy or not, right? Along the spectrum. When there is no fishing pressure, you'll have your big megafauna like your tiger sharks, which there are a lot of on Sable, in case you don't know, right? In case you don't dive. Some nice big Nassau groupers, some stoplight parrotfish. And then as fishing intensity increases, even though you might have like highly protected marine reserves, there are still some fishermen who like to skim off the top, you know. Then when you have some gear and effort restrictions, like even if you have quotas and that kind of thing, because of course politicians have to keep the fishermen happy because they're the ones who provide the votes for especially in the Caribbean, those are the fishermen are the ones who provide the votes to these politicians. So especially in Jamaica, well, I get to that particular case in a little bit. But otherwise, the fishermen, if the fishermen don't get what they want, the politicians actually get kicked out, right? But in the case of an open access ecosystem where you can just fish all you want, you have no top predators. All you catch is doctor fish or blue tangs and ocean surgeons, maybe some conies, and very tiny parrotfish. I'm not sure if anybody is on Facebook a lot. There was a video of a spear fisherman who was so excited to get a doctor fish that was this size. He decided to create a video, take out his phone while on a paddleboard. So you know his excitement. Take out his phone on a paddleboard to say, oh my God, look at what I just caught. Look at what I just caught. See what I'm talking about? The younger fishermen who have no idea how big these fish can get? That's what we're dealing with in the Caribbean. So unfortunately, when there's an excess of fishing pressure, you have a loss of biodiversity and a detrimental cascading effect on ecosystems. Right. So how do we monitor the fisheries on Sable and Statia? Right. Ayumi, because we're friends and I like to big you up. She and I are in charge of collecting that fisheries data. She on Sable and I on Statia. Right. So what we do is we collect catch weight, both on fish and lobster, on Statia for conch as well. The type of fishing gear they use, we collect a lot of information from these fishermen. The time that they spend, how long these traps are left out. We also measure fish, the length of fish, the type of categorizing them by species, measure the lobsters to make sure they're a certain size, and the queen conch. We also conduct fisheries research. You get to conduct a lot of shark research because you have a lot of sharks. I don't get to do that on station. I'm very jealous. But our positions are strictly observational, right? We can try and kind of push fishermen in a certain direction, but if they don't want to go into the direction, we jeopardize our ability to collect that data and to collect reasonable and accurate data, right? And then this information that we collect is used to guide management and policy. So in a way, we allow the fish to be in the meeting room with all the policy people. This information that we collect, unfortunately, only gives an indirect measure of reproductive success for each of these fish stocks. And but there is no direct measure of if the fish stocks that we are using reproduce successfully, right? All we do is we measure fish, and it isn't until this kind of data just because okay. Give me 2 seconds. This data operates in such a way that by the time the things are going bad, you end up in this situation, right? It's a little bit too late, right? That's what this kind of information gives you. Because we measure the size of the fish and the size of the lobsters, when we realize that all the fish are too small, everything is already gone, essentially. And the only thing you can do then is put a ban on it, or you say, okay, you can't collect these fish during this period. And fishermen don't like that. Fishermen are very independent entrepreneurs, especially the ones in Jamaica. You don't want to mess with them. Not saying, okay, that was a bit too. I'm not saying that they're trying to kill you. I know Jamaica is kind of a little bit rough, but that's not the case. That's not the case. If anything, they just sell you small fish. That's all. Right. So we want to have a fishery that is sustainable, that is using a resource in such a way that it avoids depletion. Right. And how we do that, how we make sure our fisheries is sustainable, is we have to ensure that the fish are able to reproduce. Right. But for most locations, it's kind of each location is very specific. Each territory is very specific to the level or the size of maturity, which I'll get to in a bit, of how these fish, when these fish are able to reproduce, right? So most Caribbean fisheries are in this area at the moment, where fishing costs are super high and the benefits that you get start to plummet. No matter how much you put into the fishery, no matter how many more traps you throw out, you're not going to get any more than you're already getting. And over time, that will just continue to deplete. So we want to get into this area. I'm not really into the maximum sustainable yield, because at any point you're on that point where you make that one mistake and everything goes to the toilet. So we want to stay in this position. And how do we get into that position? So how do we know enough fish are breeding, right? And as I mentioned before, Dr. Jeremy Prince kind of developed this very simple method. And from that, we can determine the spawning potential of these species. So we conduct spawning potential surveys, right? But now to give you, it's better for me to explain how we need fish populations to increase by starting with ourselves, because humans, face it, humans love themselves, right? Don't try to tell yourself, no, I'm humble. No, people, we have gotten this far as a species because we're selfish, right? So for humans, if you want a population to increase, each couple has to have 2 or more children, because you have to replace the geezers before they go off, right? I'm 30 next year. I'm feeling old already. I'm sorry, guys. If you want to have a stable population, each couple has to have 2 kids, right? To replace their lovely parents. Is that better? Yeah. If you have a population, when you have a population decline, the couples are having 2 children or less than 2 children. And that's why in cases like Japan and Germany and even Canada, which there's a large population of Jamaicans, by the way, because their population is declining, they like to invite a lot of immigrants in, right? To the point where they have like a Jamaica festival in Japan, right? It's a big thing every year. Mm. So they like to invite people into their country, right, to build up their population. In terms of fishes now. Oh, wrong way. Getting ahead of myself. For fish, that mark of where you want to keep your EDA population stable or to increase it or to decrease it is you need 20% or more of your fish stock to reproduce. If you have 20% or more of your fish stock reproducing, your population will increase. If you're just having 20%, your population will remain stable. Anything below 20%, and you're not looking very good, right? So what we do in this case, how do we conduct these fish spawning potentials? We measure the length of the fish, which we're already doing, right? And then the next step is to assess the size of maturity, right? And that includes opening up the fish and looking at their special lady or male parts, right? So what we do for all of these fish is that we to assess the size of maturity, and the size of maturity essentially is fish puberty, the size at which a fish is able to reproduce, is physically able to reproduce. And there are 3 stages that we essentially assess these fish for. If the fish are immature, and for those fish, the gonads are almost indistinguishable. They're very thin lines in some fish. So the immature gonads in this particular fish is here. They usually have 2 gonads, by the way. And here, for this fish, I think it's here and just here. And this one is very obvious for this fish. Can everybody? Okay. For males, it looks like this, and they're more lobular in, in shape, and usually have a white or creamish color. For females, they're a lot more tubular and are usually reddish in color, sometimes yellow, depending on the type of fish. And yes, this is what female fish look like. So we collect, which we're already doing kind of. We collect the length of the fish, and then we assess. We have to open up the fish to see if it's immature, and if it's mature, if it's a male or a female, right? And this is what the data sheet looks like, right? Very simple method. And then from this, we're able to determine the frequency of mature individuals per size class. So, and then determining the L50, or the size of maturity. L50 refers to the size of maturity at which 50% of the population, half of the population, is able to reproduce, right? And then from that, we're able to determine the size limit, or the set size, as Dr. Jeremy Prince calls it, to make sure that if you catch fish larger than this size, you are 9 times out of 10 sure that the fish population, the 20% of the fish in that population are reproducing, right? So in this case, in this graph, we'll have length of the fish on the x-axis and the percentage of maturity on the y-axis. Essentially, when we collect this data, 50% maturity is indicated by the 50%, and we kind of draw the graph over, the line over, nice little rulers. As I said, it's very simple. And in this case, it's around 202 centimeters. I think it should be millimeters, not centimeters. Okay. So when we collect the size of the fish and if the fish are mature or not, right? We then produce this graph when we're doing our samples, right? So there's 2 additional types of information that you need when doing this type of assessment. We need the average size of the fish for that particular species in that particular population, and the maximum size at which that fish can get to, right? In this case, our sample size is around 425 individuals that were sampled, and this is a fishery that has no fishing pressure. There's no one fish in this population, right? And then the size of maturity for this this species is around 12%. It's 12 centimeters, sorry. So in this case, this population is experiencing 100% spawning. That is, every individual in this population has been able to spawn, right? Has been able to reproduce, right? When we add a little bit of fishing pressure, because the fishermen are going to go for the most and biggest fish, which is like the average size fish, that starts to decrease, as well as the larger fish, right? You add more fishing pressure, and that number decreases. The number of fish of the average size starts to decrease, as well as it starts to shift. As you can see, the average size, which in this case is around 21 centimeters, has now shifted to around 18 centimeters, right? And as we increase that fishing pressure again, which is what happens in the Caribbean, the larger fish are essentially almost gone, and the average size has now become around the size of maturity, right? So like I had said before, this white area represents 100% spawning potential, right? As we continue to increase fishing pressure, we now realize that all the fish that are all the fish that are left to get caught are the fish that are immature, all the juveniles, right? And we continue to increase that, it just gets worse and worse and worse until there's a local extinction in that, a local population extinction. So in that particular area where we're sampling, although all those fish are gone because they haven't been able to reproduce. So what we're aiming for is 20% spawning, right? As I said before, the white area represents 100%. It's dead, 100%. And then this is roughly 20% of the population. So we're aiming for this size, for this graph when we collect our data. Anything less than this, we're in trouble, right? So this is data from a snapper species in the Solomon Islands, and the red area indicates the data that was collected by the fishermen. This is what it should look like if there was 100% spawning happening, if there was no fishing, and this is what 30% looks like. 30% spawning looks like. So the data that they've collected has kind of indicated that it's around 27% happening, right? And in order to maintain this 27%, but if you want to maintain a stable population, you go to 20%, but everybody wants more fish, right? So we go for the 30 and the 40. So this is around 27. The average set size in this population is around 23.5 centimeters. So if you want your population to increase, if you want it to maintain around 30%, 27 to 30% spawning, you only allow the fishermen to catch fish that are greater than 23.5 centimeters, right? If you want to go for 100% spawning, you go for 28 centimeters, right? So very simple method. All you need to collect is the size of the fish and if they're mature or not, know the average size of the fish that fish can get to and the larger size. Those four data, as well as there's a bunch of equations that you put the data into that then gives you your size of maturity and then the 20% all that fancy stuff, you know. And that's all. It's that simple, right? Fishermen have been very receptive to it in the Pacific, and it's just been spreading to all the islands because all the fishermen are realizing that, hey, our livelihood is at stake, right? Now, let's see if we can determine, or what do you think the size of maturity of these fish are? Like to get interactive with Larry, you're not allowed to answer because I know you have a very good memory and we spoke about this yesterday on the boat. Right? So, yellowtail snappers, what's the biggest yellowtail snapper you've ever seen? On Sable, I saw, oh my God, I was amazed on the dive yesterday. But anybody here, raise your hand. What's the biggest yellowtail snapper you've ever seen? Or think, what's the largest you think they can get to?
What they can get to or what I've seen?
Well, what they can get to.
I think they can get 180.
180? Okay, that's 180 centimeters.
No, 1 meter and 80 centimeters.
Oh, let's go, yeah, 180 centimeters.
Yeah.
For red hind, anybody? Well, I'm assuming that you know the name of these fish. Everybody can ID some of these fish, right? Know these fishes, right? So this is a red hind. This is a coney. This is a mutton snapper. This is a yellowfin grouper, and this is a Nassau grouper. So we have 180 going once for the yellowtail snapper. Anybody for the red hind? Largest size you think it gets to?
120.
60 centimeters. Larry.
120.
120. Whoa, going big money. Big money. Conies, anybody?
40.
80. Okay. Mutton snapper. Okay. Let's say big. Okay, big. Nassau groupers. Anybody? Very big. Over 100. Over a meter. Over a meter. Yellowfin snapper as well. I mean yellowfin grouper as well. Right? Okay. At what size do you think the yellowfin snapper gets to sexual maturity? Like, give us that if you need a reference. That's why I brought my mystical, magical measuring tape. Right? No, it's not fish, just rust. I stole this from the construction worker at CNSM. Yes, the size of maturity. What size do you think they get to? They get to, if you say they get to as big as 180. Oh, that's what I thought. Okay.
We're missing the right sizes, you know.
Okay.
Extra.
What size do you think a red hind reaches fish puberty? 35? Somebody said 35? 35. What size do you think conies get to fish puberty? 40 centimeters. Okay. Mutton snappers, what size do you think they get to fish puberty? Come on, just throw numbers at me if you're 50. 50. Okay. Nassau groupers, what size do you think they get to sexual maturity? 60, 40, 90. 19?
I said 90.
Pardon?
Why is fish metric?
Why is because it's the why would you go into inches though? Like inches is so confusing. I'm in Jamaica where they use inches and I'm like, please, I'm confused. I beg you, I don't get the 3 1/8 whatever eighths. Let's just stick to metric, please. I beg you. If you want to borrow this, it has inches and centimeters.
Okay, all right.
There we go.
So when you ask us, just roll it out.
Okay.
And we'll vote.
And you tell. There we go. Okay. Nassau groupers, what size do you think they get section?
Yeah, like that.
Not there.
No bigger.
About here.
Maturity, a little bit less than that.
Little bit less. Maturities are here. So okay, this is around 50 centimeters. Okay. Yellowfin groupers, what size? You want the inches? I tell you, I can't read it. 1 feet 22 inches. That's what it's. I think that's what it says. Okay. All right. Okay. So these are some of the figures for the numbers that are beside the fish are the largest that they've been recorded to get to, right? So yellowfin snappers, largest size 86 centimeters. Right, it's kind of dark, but 86 centimeters is around this big. Oh. Right? And I think I saw some of these on the dive yesterday. Oh my goodness, man. I thought they were horse-eyed jacks, and I got a little bit close. I was like, Jesus, it's a snapper. Right? Red hind gets to 76 centimeters around here. So big a red hind can get. I think Ayumi said 90 something, maybe. Yeah, 20 centimeters off. But conies, if you allow them to grow. So these are sizes. If there's no fishing pressure and there's no fishing pressure and they're allowed to live to their ripe old age, grandpa style, yes, or grandma style, right? Which might change when I tell you something after this. So it's mostly grandpa style. Mutton snappers get to 94 centimeters. That's around this long. A mutton snapper can get that big, right? Nassau groupers, 122. That's how big a Nassau grouper can get in its ripe old age, right? Yellowfin groupers get to around 100 centimeters, right? But unfortunately, or kind of unfortunately, yellowfin snappers, they become sexually mature or go through fish puberty at 15 centimeters, right? 15 centimeters. This is when yellowfin snapper are considered sexually mature, right? I must say that this data is from fish in Florida. So the purpose of doing this study that I want to do on Statia is to get these figures for Statia. But just to, give you an idea of what it's like, I just use the Florida figures, right? Conies get to sexual maturity at, call it 15 centimeters, the same thing, right? Red hind gets to sexual maturity at 25, right? Mutton snappers get to 28, right? And Nassau groupers, 48 centimeters, right? Yellowfin groupers, 51, a little bit bigger, right? So, if you're fishing along the shoreline and you catch fish smaller than any of these sizes, you're robbing the cradle. How does that make you feel? No, God, I'm getting too Oprah on you. I'm sorry. I take it back. Right? But you have to make sure that if you're catching fish smaller, and size of maturity varies per species, of course. And the purpose of this project is to get the size of maturity for all of the commercial important species. So you can then say, please don't catch fish larger than this size, because if you do, you're essentially robbing yourself of a future that you can catch more fish from. Right? Another interesting fact is that some species of fish change sex, right? So most groupers, parrotfish, wrasses, and angelfish go through sequential hermaphroditism, right? For most of these species here, except for Nassau grouper, Nassau grouper can be born as male or female. For parrotfish, conies, and red hinds, I can't remember about the yellowfin groupers. They start out as females, and then they get mature as females, and then when they get to a certain size, they change sex, right? For conies, they change sex around 20 centimeters, right? For red hinds, it's between I think 25 and 30 centimeters, and these fish, you can catch a fish that is both because it's transitioning, right? For parrotfish, parrotfish are quite interesting, right? So parrotfish males can be primary males. You have primary males and secondary males. Primary males are males that are born males and stay males their entire life. Secondary males are males that are born as females, and then after they get to a certain size, they change sex. But the primary males are sneaky bastards, if I can use that word, because they look like females. So, and because parrotfish reproduce in a harem setting, that is, one man has a lot of women, which is very Caribbean, right? Whoops, I should have said, my bad. So you will have, and then, but again, this part is very Caribbean as well. You have a male that looks like a female that sneaks in, mates with the females, and then goes away again. Right? So, I was on a dive. The day I found out this information. I was on a dive and I saw a terminal phase parrotfish chasing another decent size initial phase parrotfish or red parrotfish. I was like, why is he chasing him? And then the same day I went on the computer and was like, oh, what's happening? I was like, yeah, he's probably just trying to get him away from his women. Right? So that's interesting. But why I even bring up this whole sex change thing is that if you have a population of fish, of conies, of red hinds, and those populations, the average size of your fish is less than this size, there are little to no males in your population, right? And there's no one for these females to get with. They're all lonely, right? Nobody. You know the Queen song, "Find Me Somebody to Love." They can't find anybody to love, right? To have babies with. So it is very important that you also find out the size at which these fish change sex, and you have to include that in the set size that the size limit that you want to enforce, right? Because if you don't enforce it, chances are you'll have you're turning your fish population into a sorority, right? Which can be fun, I hear, right? If anybody, no? Okay. Yeah. So, how do we improve fish stocks? Marine reserves are key in improving fish stocks, and especially where You have fishermen who know that something is up or something is amiss with their fish populations. You protect a large enough habitat, you can still go on with fishing, because that particular habitat will allow the fish in there to grow, to get to their size of maturity, to change sex into to male, to then find the love of their life, to mate once and then find another love of their life, you know, as time goes on. As these marine reserves, I'll give fish time to breed, right? And a healthy, well-maintained reef can yield 0.2 to 40 tons of seafood per kilometer square annually and globally, if you have a healthy reef, right? And if I can say, but I'm not, if I can say, the reefs around Saba or the island are quite healthy. Well, as it relates to fish population, but everyone knows that coral reefs around the Caribbean are going down. But I do still see a decent size corals here, right? So that's good. Saba is doing a good job. Can give a round of applause to Saba, right? Yeah. So there's a thinking or a mentality that I'd like to bring about, right? And to help to change, right? Most fishermen will say, I've been fishing for generations, right? This is what I do. I love doing this. I'm not going to change, right? Why are you telling me to not catch these small fish? You're telling me to not catch my money. This is my life. That little fish can feed my family, right? But you have to realize that, yes, while you take that small fish, you're only feeding your family for that one night, right? And if you allow that fish to grow, you could feed your family for many nights, right? So this is a little analogy that I've heard of and I would like to present here, right? Who here loves bacon? Sorry, vegetarians. Bacon lovers, right? Bacon lovers, all right. Suppose you love bacon so much that you want to have a nice pig farm to spread your joy of bacon to everyone, right? You get some piglets, right? You feed them, they grow, and they look nice, and you say, all right, I want some bacon now, getting some bacon. Do you kill that pig? No. If you want to have bacon for the rest of your life, right? Do you kill that pig? No. And eat the bacon? No. Or do you let Betsy, as we like to call our pigs in Jamaica, Betsy, and cars? Don't ask me why. This just happens. It's a culture, right? Do you feed? Do you let that pig grow? Do you let them produce more piglets? Or 1 litter of piglets, 2 litter of piglets, 3, 4, 5, and then 5 or more, as many as you want, right? And then you get to eat your pig because why? The pig house is full. You have bacon for the rest of your life. Right? You're nice. Chocolate covered bacon, anybody? No? No? Who say I don't like chocolate, but I like chocolate covered bacon? All right? So, oh, sorry. Oops, I didn't know that. I only get it when I go to the States. Which, because Trump is president, I don't go to the States. So this is what we're doing to the reef, right? You're getting that piglet, and you're stealing money from out of your own pockets, essentially, right? But this is what they're doing to the reefs. You eat the fish before they have a time to breed, so they can produce their millions and millions of fish, right? Of new babies. So the reef is just like a garden, right? Eventually, what you reap or cannot reap, you will sow or cannot sow, right? All right. So what can you do to help? Encourage restaurants and stores to support sustainable fishing, support local conservation NGOs like SCF, CNSI, STNAP on Statia, support marine reserves. If you're living in an area that there's no marine reserve, kind of champion that cause, because it's very important for those for fish to have a good habitat. Support sustainable fishermen, right? And just spread the word. If you are a fisherman yourself, you can even start collecting this data. If there are any fishermen here, you can come to me and I can show you how to do it quite easily, right? So and this kind of data you keep collecting over time, and you compare it from year to year to see if your populations are successfully reproducing or not, right? Any questions? Time to talk. Let's talk.
Yeah, if you were advocating a minimum fish size for keeping the catch, wouldn't it be better for the fish population to set a maximum size and leave the really big ones and you can take more of the small ones?
Yeah, so that's where the
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, yes. So the question is, if you're going to set a set size for fish, right? Why not go to the maximum instead of going to the right on the border where they would be reproducing at 20%, more or less, right? So that's a very that depends from location to location, right? It depends on how important that fish is to the population. If you can get 20 to 30 to 40%, you'll be happy with that, because if you have 30 to 40% of spawning potential happening, your population will increase slowly. Yes, you're taking a few, but if you have a location that is locked off and that you can allow those fish to reproduce, you can still have fishermen taking the excess, in a sense. Yeah.
How long does it take for a fish to reach?
Okay, so the question is, how long does it take a fish to get to size of maturity? That depends on the location, availability of food, the predators, how many predators are there to take this little one's life, how many fishermen there are. So it varies a lot. And that's why this work has to be done at each location, so that you can take into consideration the environmental factors that's affecting it.
Years or decades?
Pardon?
In scale.
Uh-huh.
Are we talking about months, years, scale?
What I've heard is that if you're going to introduce a marine reserve, you can see positive results or an increase in population within 5 years, right?
Even if we have this set size, right, for a lot of these fishermen, for example in Jamaica, would that even help in terms of when you catch a lot of these fish are deep dwellers like snappers, and when they come up they die anyway, right? Because of their exposed and their blown up ladder. This is a big problem with cod, for example, in the Netherlands. They die when you catch them. So you can throw them back anyway, but they die. So is that how would we solve that?
That is a very interesting question. The question is, if you're catching deep water fish, right? And by the time you bring these, if you're using fish traps, by the time you bring these fish up to the surface, they're basically dead, right? Well, in certain species, you can deflate the swim bladder and they can be fine. For those species that you can't really do that to, right? Exactly. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. Yeah. I mean, for those kind of fish, if you can determine when these fish spawn, and if snappers are usually aggregating spawners, if you find out when they spawn, you just lock up, say no fishing of these type of fish during that time, you're more likely to increase the population that way as well. Somebody had a question in the front, yes.
Yeah, you talk a lot about fishermen, local fishermen. What about all the international trawlers and stuff? What impact do they have?
Oh, come on now. The question is, what is the impact of international trawlers on the reefs, right? International trawling has kind of, there's some, I know maybe like a few years ago there was one that was using these waters, if I'm not mistaken, right? But I'm not sure, I don't think they still do that, as far as we know. But people sneaky them ways there, right? So the impact that that's a good question. Oh yes, people drop. What I've heard is that they have the anchors at the bottom of the nets just drag and just pick up everything that they can, right? Everything, even things that you don't want. So I mean, it's best to just ban that kind of fishing. Just get rid of it altogether and move towards more sustainable methods of fishing. Yeah. Any other questions?
How are the fishermen in Statia reacting to your work?
So at the moment, this is kind of still in the planning phases. I get a few fish from fishermen every once in a while, and I just do a little exercise just to see if it's actually feasible on Statia. One thing I kind of forgot to mention, fish that spawn during particular times of the year, you are more likely to catch, to find a fish or to be able to identify a fish as male or female during that time, right? During the time of the year that they're likely to spawn, right? Other times outside of that year, which we found out when we were dissecting the fish with the kids in the high school, that most of the red hinds that we saw in the conies looked immature, but they were well above the size of the of sexual maturity, right? Yes.
So in the past few subjects that I followed, it's shown that some fish even evolutionarily change their maturity. So they make their maturity go earlier than they're supposed to be in order to actually have offspring.
Yes.
How did you think that would fit in a system where we determine the fishing efforts on their maturity?
So one particular species that has garnered a lot of attention with that particular issue is the parrotfish, actually. Parrotfish are so elastic, or their sexual maturity is more elastic, right? That if there's a female, if their male dies, a female just grows and just replaces it. And they know they need to reproduce as much as they can, so they kind of just make do with what they can, basically. Yeah.
Well, we have an audience here, and we have Ayumi from Seba, Kimani and Stacia, and Dahlia. Can you give us a little update for the audience of how the fishermen locally on both islands are cooperating or not?
The question is, well, from my side, can you go to the front? And then there's the microphone. Sorry, getting right up there. That's perfect. Thank you.
I know they was going to draw you up eventually.
Oh, yeah. Hi, good evening. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hi, good evening, everybody. So I do basically the same work as Kimani here on Seba. I've been doing it now for 2 years. And there have been a few cases that we spoke with fishermen to ask them actually, how would you feel if we would do another closed season again for the red snapper, which we did back in 2017 for a couple months. I think it was from March until the end of September, like out of my head right now. And some are still in favor for it because I still get some reports of, hey, my fish are getting smaller and smaller. And then we have, of course, a few fishermen that they see that it's actually kind of a gold mine. And I fully understand that they are not agreeing into closing one of their incomes. So you should find quite a balance for them, because you cannot just take something away and not giving anything in return. But yeah, there's like ups and downs, of course, to doing a closed season, because you're also impacting someone when doing that. It's not only for conservation, but also like for incomes from other people. But yeah, I mean, we've been seeing this year a lot of grouper species being brought in, bigger ones than the previous years. So it's also quite a good sign as well that at least for the Saba Bank, we're seeing more and more groupers coming back.
For Stacia, the fishermen there, you have some who are for it, and some who are, is usually the older ones, who are very set in their religious ways. Right? I had made this presentation once to a fisherman, and it mentioned the whole sex change thing. And he said, no, fish don't change sex. God make man and make woman. Don't go, so stop lying. I was like, well, I can prove it to you, sir. If I get a fish and I keep that fish in an aquarium and I feed it, and I introduce put a female in and introduce more females, eventually that fish is gonna, get a little, and then want to reproduce and change sex. I was like, no. It's like, okay, I can't change your mind, sir. But it is what it is, So there are some fishermen who are like, okay, you're making sense. I can agree with the quotas and setting a size limit. So it's twofold. I don't know if I can be very crass and just say you just have to wait till the older ones retire. No, but fishermen never retire. There's a guy in his 70s putting traps out, right? But he's one of the ones who's kind of like, yes, I agreed, you know. But this is all I have. He says, this is all I have to do. But if I can protect what I have, you know, what I have.
Yeah, the fishing industry changes
How far
one
do
funeral
some of
at a
these
time.
fish travel? How much impact is what we do here on Saba impact St. Kitts and St. Kitts here?
So the question is, how far do these fish travel? So there are two ways fish travel, right? One, most fish usually have a home range, right? And for pelagic species, they migrate all up and down the Eastern Caribbean. For reef fish like parrotfish and the groupers, I have heard of cases where groupers have traveled like kilometers to get to their aggregation site, right? There are other cases, the other way fish travel is when they reproduce and the eggs are caught in the current and they're taken to other countries, right? So there are two ways. For the releasing of eggs, that has depending on the competency stage or how long that fish egg is able to stay in the plankton at a competent level, as in able to then develop into a fish or a fish larvae, that limits the distance in which it can travel, right? So for conch, 2 years ago I made a presentation, my first time at CLN, thanks Lynn, about conch larvae. And conch larvae can last between 30 and 60 days just floating in the sea. To the point where either by a stepping stone fashion, Saba conch are related to Jamaica conch, right? And that is either because the larvae that is being produced in Saba are being carried to, say, Puerto Rico, and then from Puerto Rico to Haiti, and then from Haiti to Jamaica, in that sense. Yeah, so there are multiple ways fish can travel. And it does have a lot of impact on populations down the line. Yeah.
So a lot of what we do is not just good for Saba,
It's good for
the whole
the entire Caribbean, literally the entire Caribbean, even impacting Mexico, right? But unfortunately, I have bad news as it relates to the queen conch in Jamaica. I'm not sure if anybody had heard, but the populations there essentially crashed either earlier this year or the ending of last year. Which my research kind of alluded to in a way, because the population that they fish now, they have no idea where the juveniles are coming from. My research kind of determined that yes, there's some linkage with Saba, but there's no connection with the rest of the island. So if you fish out that population faster than it replenishes itself, you'll eventually have a population crash, and boom, there was a population crash. And the government is now saying because the conch is the second most, it makes the second largest amount of income after lobster, right? So there are thousands of fishermen that benefit from conch. And if the minister goes to them and says, sorry, for the next 10 years you cannot fish conch, Jamaicans can get a bit rowdy if you haven't heard, especially during the 1980s, if anybody ever heard about what happened during the 1980s because of political things. So the government has to be very tiptoesy when it comes to these things, right?
What can be done to sensitize? I mean, we talk about getting rid of the older generation of fishermen, and let them die out, so to speak. But in reality, I mean, because things are happening so fast that we don't have the luxury of time. So what can be done to sensitize those there now because of the take Jamaica where that crash?
So the question is, what can be done to sensitize the older generation of or any fishermen in general about what's happening now and the need for change, right? One thing that they've found to work is trying to make alternative livelihoods, right? Because the fishermen can agree with you all you want. Yes, I agree that the fish are too small and they need a set size, but I need to feed my family too, you know? So if we can find an alternative method for them to use, like the fishing boats to do tours or something like that, or another means of making income, the sky's the limit when it comes to that. That's the way you kind of teach them to go another direction. In Jamaica, because I love my home, I have to mention them. They're now starting a thing where each community is developing a fish sanctuary, right? And they found an area where they can protect, and they're now making a dive tourism out of it. And this is being run by fishermen. Yeah, fishermen who go out on night patrols to make sure no one is coming into their home, essentially, to take what they're working hard for. Yeah, and then they get to make us a side income by offering dive tourism or boat tours or something like that. So there's always another solution that you can get to, in most cases. Yeah. Any other questions?
Sweet chicken.
Thank you, Kimani, and your magical tape measure. All right, folks, we have some upcoming events as usual. Tomorrow at 5:30 at the See and Learn tent, we have a bat walk with our expert, Bart Nort, who is somewhere around here. In the back, way in the back, yep. Then again on Thursday is his presentation. He'll be switching gears and presenting on marine mammals at Brigadoon. Then on Saturday, we have a oil research dive with expert Jim Orris, 1 p.m., Fort Bay Harbor. And also on Saturday, we have another presentation by our fern expert, Frank Axelrod. We'd like to thank all of you guys for coming out here, and thank you, Facebook, for joining with us virtually. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors, Queen's Garden, thank you so much. Invite you to stick around for dinner and drinks afterwards. And we'd also like to give a special thanks to Carib Trans. Thank you. Also, if you get the chance, if you've done a field project or seen more of our presentations, we'd like for you to fill out a survey if you wouldn't mind. It'll take a couple minutes. They're right over there at that table. If you have any other questions, buy raffle tickets. Just let Tiffany or myself know. And with that, have a wonderful night, everyone.
Miami is known as an international community and the hub of trade and logistics for the Caribbean and Americas. A leader in the freight logistics industry, Carib Trans has served the Caribbean region for more than 30 years, with a footprint that has grown from one island to now serving the majority, as well as Central and South America. Carib Trans is an NVOCC, a non-vessel operating common carrier, meaning it has the same responsibilities as a shipper without owning the vessels or planes. Its primary customers, individuals who ship clothing, electronics and other personal items, and occasionally cars.
Most of the stuff that they're sending is because they don't get it there. So for us to provide it on two services, air and ocean, we can give it a choice of how fast you want it. So if you want it really fast, we're going to send it by air, you're going to have it next day, sometimes even the same day.
That on-time service has been the key to Carib Trans' success, whether shipping by air or by sea. The company moves about 5,000 TEUs of freight each year, more than any NVOCC in the region. And since it joined the Saltchuk family of transportation companies a couple of years ago, Carib Trans can offer customers even more shipping options.
Other NVOCCs, they depend on other shipping lines that are not part of their family. So they need to rely on whether they're going to sell or not, whether they are late or not. It doesn't happen to us because it's part of our family of companies. We control the service that we give.
Sí, buenos días, por favor, con Diana.
Quality service is what keeps customers coming back. Customers are treated like family, and when they leave to research competitors, it doesn't usually last long.
They have left and they have come back because they've said that, nobody does it better than Carib Trans. So because of that relationship.
That exceptional service includes consolidation. Customers can have freight sent here and stored for free for up to a month. then consolidated and shipped on to the islands and Americas, a perk for the region's growing small business market. Puerto Rico is an expanding market for Carib trans, about the size of Connecticut and rich in history and culture. Puerto Rico is home to many pharmaceutical manufacturers, as well as a thriving tourism industry for which Carib Trans moves raw materials and supplies. But serving small businesses is still the company's bread and butter here in San Juan. Businesses like Caldera Café, a local coffee company. Owner Alfredo Rodriguez started growing coffee beans at his mountain farm about 20 years ago. He recently ordered a variety of new equipment for his farm and shop. He uses Carib Trans because it consolidates shipments, which cuts down on the number of times he has to pay the Puerto Rico import tax.
Not many companies want to do that. They want only big cargoes and maybe half container or full containers, but they don't want to consolidate because it's more difficult.
Turning challenges into opportunities is what Carib Trans does, and that includes helping to grow small businesses like Caldera Café by taking the hassle out of shipping.
We can be a gateway to expand their business in the Caribbean and back to the U.S. And wherever they can sell their products, we are also going to be a partner for them.
That customer dedication has made Carib Trans what it is today. Now, as part of a larger family with more transportation resources, Carib Trans hopes to grow beyond its current market, offering services to additional Latin American ports and eventually Europe and Asia. But even when it becomes a global logistics company, Carib Trans wants to stay true to its roots, always providing personalized, reliable customer service and a commitment to the communities it serves.